Hello friends, welcome back to the bench. Our patient today is Asus Prime Z390P. This is the board we tried to fix the pins on the CPU socket. Unfortunately, one of the pins is broken off and it's not a redundant pin, it's some kind of data pin, so the board doesn't work. Unfortunately, this board doesn't come with the LEDs to tell you whether the CPU is detected or not. So it's a little bit of guesswork with this one. But our goal today is not to fix the board. Our goal is to get the temperatures right. So you probably thought I gave up on the whole CPU socket replacement endeavor. Not at all. I just needed to give it a little more time. Our last rather unsuccessful attempt was resulted in a deformation of the socket, and the reason for that was because the heat gun was hitting right in the center. I increased the temperature too high and the airflow too high. So point number one, airflow needs to be relatively slow. Point number two, temperature needs to be relatively low. So 300 is our maximum at the moment. We'll see, maybe we can do it at 290. Point number two, as you can see, I made it a square, or roughly shape of a square. So now, when I lower the nozzle, it covers the entire CPU, creating temperature inside, heating up inside. Second thing, those thingies that I put around it, two of these, one here and one there, like so, they also have a little bit of thermal mass, so they improve the stability of the temperature inside the nozzle. And it fits the CPU relatively well. It's not perfect, but it's relatively well. Is it completely parallel to the board? Or perpendicular, if you think of it this way? It is not. Unfortunately, especially on the other side that you cannot see, there's a little crack, or even a significant crack, through which the air will be escaping, which is fine. I think this should be enough. I performed one test and tried to resolder the socket. I didn't keep it long enough, but it did solder some pins. I don't want to say majority of pins, because that's not the case, but at least we got some adhesion. With my previous nozzle, without using the second air gun, none of the pins melted, not a single one. With this nozzle, I melted at least some of them. So now what I want to test is just monitor the temperature better and increase the time that I keep the nozzle down. But first we need to remove the old socket, and that's going to require a slightly higher temperature because this is lead-free solder. That's number one, but we don't worry about deforming and melting the socket, the original socket, because it's going to be replaced. So I may increase the temperature over 300, but I'll start with 300 and probably around 5 minutes of heating, maybe a little less, maybe 3 minutes. I will be measuring the time so I can catch good timing, and we'll see what's going to happen to the socket. So without further ado, let's speed up the footage and see what we can do. Alrighty, so let's focus on successes. First of all, the temperature is good. So this is the original socket. As you can see, no ripped pads or anything. There's not even the slightest sign of overheating, melting, nothing. It came off beautifully. Oh, maybe is this? No, it just looked like discoloration, but it's fine. So no melting, no nothing. And this original socket is lead-free solder. So we heated it up with just, because before I couldn't get it done with just my nozzle. I had to use the other heat gun to heat in addition to melt the solder. And I could do it only on one side of the CPU, so I would just gently pull on one side and just go around until everything dislodges. So now the nozzle is capable of creating stable temperature that is perfectly enough to melt lead-free solder. Actually, when the socket came off, I was even surprised. Like, there was no bridging or anything. Now the new socket. On this one, I actually expected issues with alignment, and you can see that it's misaligned. And actually, misalignment came from when I lifted the nozzle and I gently touched on this side to see if it's liquid, and it moved to where it's moved right now and latched on immediately. So at that point I thought that this most likely is a bust. But on the board like this one that we worked on before, you can see the perfect outline, right, of the socket on each side. On this one, the outline is not made exactly for this socket. Like, this little notch is not outlined, right? The little cut over here also no. So I knew this would be an issue, and actually, in my experience so far, the most challenging part is to actually align the socket. Surprisingly. Now, does it work? No, it does not. And I would say either because of the misalignment, or this board just didn't work before, because we never managed to boot this board, right, despite correcting the pins. And actually this one, I don't think this one even had, yeah, it did have some, yeah, there's a missing pin over there and a couple missing pins here. Yeah, so this one was the data pin, this one, and that's why we assumed that the board doesn't display anything on the display. There are no LEDs to help us diagnose it, whether it can see the CPU or not. So that's pretty much all she wrote. This is still not successful, but our next subject, I have two more sockets. Now that I know the temperature is right, the socket is soldered on very well, right? It didn't disconnect, so we did solder it on correctly, just not perfectly aligned. So our next subject is going to be from Gigabyte GA1151. This one does work without few pins, the V-core and ground. Some of them are missing, but they're redundant enough that on i3 it probably makes no difference. It has the postcard built in and the power button built in. So on this one we will know exactly. Once I remove this socket and put the new socket on, if the board doesn't run, it's gotta be because of the socket, because other than that the board works. So we're making progress. In case you were wondering whether I gave up on this project or not, as you can see I did not, and I'm making good progress. So far the nozzle is working perfectly. I will have to kind of work on it a little more probably, but for now it gets the job done. Alrighty, thank you guys very much for watching. I do appreciate you, and I shall see you in the next one.